Welcome back and live now from Fox. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's continue on with our recap of yesterday's presidential debate. Almost an hour passed during that debate before we heard moderators ask about how they would break through the stalemate and reach a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. We didn't hear a concrete plan from either Trump or Harris about how they would do so. I want to discuss what they did say with Dr. Alon Burstein. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Let's get straight into this. Of course, the first question was, how would they reach a ceasefire? Let's start with Harris. She first answered by recalling the gory details of Hamas's attack on October 7th. She then pivoted to the massive loss of life that has occurred in Gaza ever since. She then expressed her support for a two-state solution, then Israel's right to defend itself, and finally, she made a commitment to rebuilding Gaza. Basically, she gave a safe answer. We'll get to Trump in a second. But does it surprise you that we didn't hear an actual roadmap to a ceasefire from Harris? After all, if a member of the Biden administration did have a concrete plan, it would already be done, correct?
Good to see you, Austin. Yes, you're correct. The short answer to that, which I don't tend to give admittedly, is that yes, that was the safe way to go, because we see even in the ongoing hostage negotiations right now that the U.S. administration has sort of floated the idea that it is going to propose a sort of like take it or leave it deal, the final proposal to the sides. And even in the last week, the administration has started to say, maybe we're not going to actually propose it because we know both sides aren't going to take it. So it'll just look foolish to propose it. So in that sense, presenting a concrete plan, certainly in a presidential debate when all you're trying to do is convince voters, potential voters, that you have a plan, presenting a concrete plan that could fail, even in the next 2 months, could possibly fail, would not have been the strategic move. So I think, as you said, she played it safe. She tried to hit all the points that are important to different people, as everyone feels very emotionally tied to different facets of the war. You know, for some people, what's going on in the Gaza Strip, the horrendous loss of life, the humanitarian situation, is the most pressing thing, and that is what is the framing of the entire war to them. To others, the framing of the entire war is October 7th, the October 7th attack, and Israel's right to defend itself, with both sides then emphasizing, so what should be the solution? Those who premise what's happening in the Gaza Strip say an immediate ceasefire and IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Those who tend to emphasize October 7th, Israel's right to defend itself, say, okay, but Hamas has said that it is going to carry out another October 7th, so therefore what's going to be? So this was certainly the strategic and safe answer. I will also say that it also matches, to large extents, somewhat the arc that the Biden administration has gone through in this war. The Biden administration has been very, very supportive of Israel. We spoke about this for months. You know, it's given Israel the diplomatic support, the military support. Biden came and embraced Netanyahu within a week of the attack. And at first, it was really about hoping Israel defend itself. But then as the war dragged on, we saw some of the rhetoric pivoting towards how Israel defends itself, supporting Israel's right to defend itself, but the administration saying, okay, but how is that done? Questioning the loss of life in the Gaza Strip. And then we saw the administration in the last several months pivot even more, saying, okay, and what's the next plan? What's the day after? We've been through October 7th. We've been through the retaliation. We've been through the attempt to apply military pressure to destroy Hamas and return the hostages. What's the day after plan? And if we think about it, sort of Harris's rhetoric of touching on October 7th, the loss of life, looking what's happening in the Gaza Strip, rebuilding, and two-state solution is really that arc that the Biden administration has gone through in the war. At least that's how I read what she was trying to portray.
You know, I want to ask you a little bit about Trump. He didn't offer any details either. At one point, he said that Harris hates Israel and that she also hates Arabs. I won't get into the candidates' rhetoric against each other with you. I'll spare you that, Alone. But why are they being asked this question? What role will the future president of the United States have in this war?
So support for Israel has been overwhelming historically from both parties. That started to fracture a little bit, or at least to change the type of rhetoric, the type of support a little bit in the last sort of 15 years, primarily as a result of or it started at least in the very, very bad relationship between Netanyahu and Obama. And at that time, there was a lot of bad blood between the sides, and Obama, according to at least certain different leaks, really disliked Netanyahu personally and thought that he was constantly lying to him. Netanyahu also portrayed Obama within Israel as someone who's constantly pressuring Israel to try to achieve some sort of two-state solution that was going to harm Israel's security. And then, as we saw polarization deepening in the United States, the support for Israel also started to be more of a partisan issue. We saw in 2015 when Netanyahu was invited by the Republicans to speak at Congress, sort of against the will of the administration at that time, when it was talking about the Iran deal. And we've seen sort of the wavering relationship between Netanyahu, Trump, then Netanyahu and Biden. We don't know exactly what's going to be the relationship with if Harris becomes president or with Trump in the future. But the role of the president has several different sort of key elements for the Middle East. First of all, personal relationships. We've seen in the past, there have been presidents in the United States. We saw a very, very close relationship, for example, between George Bush Jr. and the prime minister of Israel at the time, Ariel Sharon. They developed a very close friendship. That ended up actually mattering when it came to where pressure was applied during the second intifada that was raging between the Palestinians and Israel. So there's one element is the personal connections. The other element is rhetoric. We see different presidents saying things like Israel has the right to defend itself, or Israel has the right to defend itself, but we question. We've seen, Chuck Schumer and different people criticizing different leaders within Israel. So the rhetoric that the president takes may have a big effect on politics internally within Israel. A third thing is actual policy, actual actions. It could very well be the United States has an entire battery of mechanisms that it could use to either pressure Israel or to alleviate pressure from Israel. Anything from very, very tangible withholding weapon sales or certain weapons, or possibly allowing weapon sales to other countries in the Middle East, to things that are a lot less sort of concrete, but still equally important, like stopping to support Israel diplomatically. Israel relies extremely heavy, and with the war and the investigations into the war that are going to be going on in the coming years, Israel's going to rely even heavier on the U.S. veto power in the Security Council. The president, the administration, that role is very, very critical for both the relationship with Israel, but also with how Israel can actually run and consider itself in the Middle East. So it will be very important how they feel towards Israel and who the identity of the president is.
Does Israel have a preferred candidate in this race, Harris or Trump?
It's difficult to say what Israel would prefer because, like, say, what do Americans prefer, right? I mean, there's obviously just like the wave of polarization that is going through the majority of the democratic world is going through Israel as well. Country is very, very polarized in terms of who they support. In this case, it is quite interesting because historically, Trump was seen in Israel as being vastly on Israel's side during his administration. I will say, not so much necessarily for what he did for Israel, but more because of his extreme disdain from Palestinians. It was seen that he, doesn't like Muslims. He immediately tried to put a ban on Muslims coming from different countries. So in the struggle between Israel and Palestinians, that's seen more on Israel's side. A couple of things that were done that were mostly nominal gestures, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem or recognizing the Golan Heights, things that didn't actually change a lot of facts on the ground for Israel, but were seen as acts in Israel's favor. So historically, Trump was seen as much more on Israel's side and aligned with Prime Minister Netanyahu. However, we also saw that right after the elections of 2020, and when Netanyahu called Biden to congratulate him, Trump was furious. Trump used rhetoric that I don't know what you're allowed to use in your channel, so I'm not going to use the swear words that he was recorded as using, but he developed a true disdain for Netanyahu that seemed to carry on for a while. So in that sense, the personal relationship that Netanyahu tried to sell in elections that were going on in 2020 in Israel about his close relationship with Trump, and then Trump may have been seen as the favored candidate, at least by the Israeli administration. Now it's unclear. Does Trump still dislike Netanyahu, or does he not? They had a meeting that occurred when Netanyahu was in the United States just now. So it's unclear. So a lot of candidates, a lot of people in Israel probably still remember Trump as the favored candidate. Others, though, would probably look at the fact that Trump seemingly does not have a plan for what is going to be in the war, and the war is dragging on, and the camp in Israel that is more in favor of trying to spiral down the war and develop a concrete day after plan might favor Harris in that case, because while we don't know what her plan is, she's at least saying that is what we're going to aspire to, as opposed to what Trump said. So I think that's where the lines are going to fall on whether different people within the Israeli populace support Harris or Trump. It's going to be based on their analysis of how they want the war to develop.
What about the leadership in Iran? Have they given us any insight into what they think about the election?
The election is being covered very heavily in Iran. However, it's hard to know. It's hard to know because different news outlets within Iran. Obviously, a lot of them are controlled by the state, and the opposition ones, you know, some of them are considered more conservative, and some of them more liberal. So it's a little bit hard to know what the trend of the population certainly is. As far as the administration is concerned, Trump is seen as someone who backtracked on the Iranian deal. There was a deal that was made led by the United States, and then the next president all of a sudden pulled out of it. So Trump is remembered very, very poorly and negatively in that regard. On the other hand, there is one aspect in which the Iranian leadership might prefer a Trump administration, and that is that Trump has indicated over the years that he would like to see less involvement of the United States abroad. We saw this in Afghanistan. Trump is the one who made the deal with the Taliban, which, while the U.S. pulled its forces out during the Biden administration, this was actually as a result of a deal that was signed during the Trump administration. Similarly, it is unclear if Trump is going to maybe stop the massive U.S. involvement in, for example, the maritime coalition that is stopping the Houthis in Yemen. All kinds of things that Iran has a lot of stakes in. On the one hand, Trump is seen as the one who pulled out of the deal, the one who would like to restore sanctions on Iran, the one who's likely going to be the less favored candidate. On the other hand, from a geopolitical standpoint, Iran may say, okay, but if Trump is elected, if there are enough terror attacks or troubles in the Middle East, he may be driven to simply stop the U.S. involvement in the Middle East that much, which will be in Iran's favor. So that's how I would imagine the Iranian administration, at least, is looking at these two candidates. And one more thing I'll say, it's important to remember that Iran, over the last 2 years, has been developing much stronger ties with Russia. We have seen the connection between the countries largely not as a result, but contributed by the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has relied on Iran for support in providing weapons, providing drones, and Russia, in turn, is providing to Iran a lot of weaponry, also a lot of advice. There's also some reports starting to emerge, possibly providing Iran some nuclear materials. So who Russia favors in between the candidates may also end up playing to how Iran views the elections in the United States.
I want to ask another thing about what Trump said. Trump reiterated something we've heard him say before, which is that Hamas would have never carried out the October 7th attack if he had been in office. Why did Hamas carry out that attack when they did? Or more specifically, Alon, did the reason actually have anything to do with who was in the White House at the time?
My analysis would say no, it didn't have anything to do with that. Hamas had been planning this attack for over a year and a half. The actual makings of this attack, and more broadly, had been laying the foundations for this attack, according to some analysts, for well over 3 years. We see this when Hamas started to, quote unquote, fool Israel into believing that Hamas wants to maintain its control on the Gaza Strip and will not go to another war. The first times that Hamas did not enter into a skirmish that Israel was having with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad was in 2019. That's the first time that Hamas showed any indication that it does not want to continue fighting Israel. It's happy to just maintain its governing power. And according to a lot of estimates, they were already starting to try to get Israel to lower its guard, to believe that Hamas is not actually intending on carrying on the war, that it's much happier just maintaining its governing power. Then Hamas was ready to execute the plan, and the plan was actually supposed to be executed long before it was. The initial plan that Hamas wanted to carry out was to carry out the attack on the eve of Passover in 2023, which would have fallen around March or April of that year. However, as a result of some intelligence, the IDF had moved another tank division down towards the Gaza Strip. Therefore, Hamas postponed what was going on, and postponed it again until the last day of the Jewish holidays on October 7th. In that sense, I haven't seen any indication that Hamas was thinking about who's in the White House. I think that the support that Biden showed, and specifically sending those two aircraft carriers immediately and threatening Hezbollah very, very directly to not enter into the war full scale on October 8th and on October 9th, I think were a critical facet of the war. I think that is one of the things that stopped Hezbollah from entering into the war. Would Trump have done the same thing? Possibly. However, I haven't seen any indications that Hamas was considering who's in the White House now therefore we should launch this attack and not launch this attack. This had a lot more to do with the internal politics within the Palestinians and in the struggle between Hamas and Israel. A lot less to do with who was in the White House at that time.
As always, Alon, we appreciate your insight. We always look forward to your daily YouTube uploads on the war as well. Have a good night.